Okay, thank you everyone for coming to this new Rewilding Intro webinar by the European Rewilding Network. Today we will be presenting the Snowchange cooperative, and we will hear a bit more about that in a second. But for those of you who are new to the European Rewilding Network, since this is an open webinar, I wanted to tell you a little bit about our community. So firstly, what is the European Rewilding Network? It is a living network of rewilding initiatives who are supporting each other to facilitate the adoption of best rewilding practices and methodologies across Europe, of course. And this includes many different aspects. Some of them are these open webinars where you get to showcase your work, like the one that you're currently a part of. There's also learning and different opportunities through webinars, access to the Rewilding Europe Capital, which is a loaning opportunity to start businesses. There's also access to the European Wildlife Comeback Fund that provides, of course, funds for reintroduction of different species. And also you get the opportunity to network and learn from other rewilding initiatives. So nowadays we have 88 rewilding initiatives from across Europe, as you can see in this map. And our newest members are Saving Wildcats from Scotland, Cousot Dunes and Wetlands from France, Palurus from Italy, and the Taurus Foundation from the Netherlands. So it is quite, it's growing quite a bit, and it's very nice to have all these new members. So we welcome them to the network. And today we will be talking about a specific group of members or initiatives that are part of the network, because today we have Tero Mustonen, who is the chair and president of Snowchange Cooperative, and he founded Snowchange in the year 2000 and holds a position as an adjunct professor of geography in the University of Eastern Finland, and he works with his colleagues in Snowchange to preserve traditional culture and environments in the face of human exploitation and climate change. And Snowchange has 5 initiatives that are part of the European Rewilding Network, which are all written down here in the presentation. I'm not going to try to pronounce them because I don't think I could effectively do that, but you can see them right here, and they all work in one way or another surrounding river basins and lakes, forests and peatlands all across Finland. So they're really exciting projects, and I'm really looking forward to listening to Tero explain the work that they do in Snowchange. So we're very, very happy to have you, Tero, here. Tero also actually just won a very prestigious award, the Goldman Environmental Award, so congratulations for that as well, and for his work here in Snowchange. Yes, and also you will have some hosts. So it's me, Julia Mata, so I am the European Rewilding Network coordinator, and also you have Kyle Gordons, who is the upscaling officer, who will be helping in the sidelines as well. So the agenda for today is very basic. First is this welcome introduction that is happening right now, very short, and then we will move on to Tero, who will be presenting the work that they do in Snowchange, and that will take around half an hour, and then after that we will have a Q&A session. So the Q&A session, you can use the Q&A function here in Zoom, and please write down your questions, write them at any point in the presentation that you want, and I will take those questions and ask them. So I'll be moderating the Q&A session. And I also wanted to ask you people that are attending this webinar that if you can, please write in the chat your name and what initiative you're associated to, if you're part of the European Rewilding Network, where you work or where you study if you are not. It's really good for us to keep track of the interest that these events have. So thank you so much for coming, and I'm really happy to welcome Tero and hear more about the work that he does. Go.
Well, Julia, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Let me, as the cult of Zoom requires, go to sharing of the screen and we'll get going. So greetings to everybody on my behalf, and let me try to get this sharing going. Can people see my PowerPoint now? Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Well, of course, Snowchange Cooperative and our Landscape Rewilding Programme have been connecting with Rewilding Europe since 2016. So it's almost, it's about 7 years, close to 8 years that we have been exchanging and thinking about how to make Europe a wilder place. And before I share a couple of slides, I will talk about our work in practice. So I'll share some of those sites that Julia mentioned, and also some of the how-to questions that we have on our table. Maybe I would like to say that the conversation that Snowchange and Rewilding Europe have had over the past 7 years has been focusing on how rewilding is defined in the different parts of the geographical space of Europe. And we have been propagating and advancing the notion of northern rewilding, where in places like Sweden, for example, or Finland, it's rather specific. It's always specific. This is not to say that the Northern Europe is somehow different or otherwise distinct from the rest of the continent, but there are questions such as the Sami people, the only peoples of Europe, peoples hunt, so a very strong hunting culture in the rural areas, and so on and so on. I'll talk about them in a bit. So why rewilding in Finland? What's going on? What is Finland? Why are we discussing rewilding in the context of Finland? I tried to summarize some of the main points on which our work is based. So we used to be a superpower of natural peatlands. Over 10 million hectares of Finland, much like in Ireland or Scotland. We used to have a lot of peatlands since the Ice Age. Over 5 million of those hectares has been affected, altered, or disturbed. I would like to say destroyed in many cases, but let's be on the positive for the sake of the argument today. This implies that over the past 100 years, a large number of carbon sinks and storages have been decimated. Now, if people want to look at the pictures on the upper right-hand corner, you can see how a peat mine looks like. So one of the domestic forms of energy that Finland has been able to produce is the peat. And that's why the peatlands have been mined, stripped, and that's how it looks like. If you are wanting to know what's going on with the forests, you can look at the map on the lower right-hand corner. That gives you 1,000 years view. This is from my friend's book, Petri Ketotokoi, and he wrote this influential book about a decade ago based on scientific and biodiversity studies, saying where are the old growth forests of Finland, or what's going on with them. All the green stuff that you can see progressing through the years. First, we are at year 1000. Most of Finland can be called fully old growth natural forest landscape, is followed after the slash by population. So then you can go up to 1550. Most of the forests are still there. Let's fast forward to 1850. We can say that perhaps 1/3 of the natural forests of Finland are still there, even though the population is 1.7 million. And let's then quickly jump to today, or 2010. That's when the book came out. And we are in a space where below Arctic Circle, 95% of our timber forests are for economic use. I'll come back to the forest question in a bit. And most of these natural, what we call old growth or natural forests, are in parks or state-led conservation areas. There's an input also to the 188,000 lakes of Finland from the peat mining and forestry actions. And all of this has led to the position where biodiversity is on decline, especially in south and middle boreal of Finland. Now, the Nordics have a wonderful image. We are always green, we are always at the forefront of everything from recycling to building cell phones and no corruption and so on and so on. Well, I'm here to give you some of the news from the other side of the facade. So the land use, without going into why, or of course there was economic benefits to Finland and the war and the repatriation. The point is that there has been a great cost to Finnish nature and impacts. One of the special contexts for Snowchange, our organization, is that both the Finnish local communities and our linguistic relatives, the Sami indigenous peoples, have been very much bystanders. So the way the natural resources have been harvested over the past century has been very top-down or heavy on the state decisions. Well, I don't have a super large number of slides, but I want to give you first the framing and then we'll go into the actual work. So in 2017, we launched something called the Landscape Rewilding Programme, Elpyvä maisema in Finnish. Julia, you don't have to repeat that. But the idea was that we then joined with Rewilding Europe, European Investment Bank, and many communities to form a completely new kind of a program that would be addressing some of these points that I was talking about. And one of the northern aspects of rewilding that is really strong in our work is the inclusion of indigenous knowledge. It's now recognized under the United Nations and the Arctic Council, European Union Commission, as well as traditional knowledge from Finnish villages with the latest science. So we are not saying that one side or the other is dominating, but one of the things that's really strong in our past 23 years in the organization is that we have been able to work with reindeer herders and Sami women to include the indigenous view. One of the other points that we are often known for are the community conserved areas. So under the Montreal new agreement from December, and before that with IUCN, you will find reference to these so-called ICCA or ICC territories as other effective measures in conservation. And we have been then registering the 3 very first sites in Finland under the UN registry for community conserved areas back in over the past 5 years. Let's go to action. What's going on? What's actually going on? What are the things we do? How are they working to advance or protect lands, waters, and communities? This is a place where I took the legendary Rewilding Europe captain at that time, Wouter Helmer. He is the kind of the father, at least one of the fathers of in Europe about 10 years ago. And this is where a lot of our program also started. You can see the photos that this is a peat mining area that was first restored and started to be worked on in 2012. You can see the large pools of water, over 110 hectares on the left-hand side. By 2020, through the program we have had, that started to cover 9 different wetland pools and the restart of the natural succession of a peatland over a moonscape. It's now the home of profoundly rare waders, for example, the long-billed blue-witcher, Derek sandpiper, and many other rare waders. It's in the Finnish world of birding, as many of you might be bird watchers or so on and so on. It's currently in the top 10 for the best national place for birding. Through our monitoring program on biodiversity, one of the indicators that we have tried to measure if this is working is the bird count. And when we started, it was the home of 2 bird species, and today it's up to 217. This is an older slide, so we just got 2 new visitors that are visiting the site. However, for the long-term rewilding success or decline, we are tracking 2, let's call them more ordinary species, the wood sandpiper and the northern pintail. So even though there are great rarities and we can demonstrate like this long-billed dewitcher, the point of rewilding over landscapes, if we are claiming to be a landscape rewilding program, we have to look at how we are addressing what used to be the common species, which are now in trouble. And that's why we are tracking on birds, for example, the sandpiper and the pintail. And just to give you the very quick results, this is the most productive nesting site for northern pintail in eastern Finland. So in fact, last year it was the only nesting place of northern pintail. So that's why a lot of these, what we used to take for granted in Europe, especially in the bird life side of things like sparrow and others, are on decline, and that's why rewilding may be one of the solutions for that work. So let's try to give some of the context of where we are today in terms of scale. Snowchange is now a large landowner in Finland. Let's not escape that fact. It's not very pleasant to own land, but it's in some cases, due to the socio-historic context for Finland, the only mechanism to save and rescue a habitat from exploitation if there is no other alternatives. We have a land concession program, which means that the landowners and the system impact is a written document where we will work with large number of landowners, and that's then expanding the program up to 52,000 hectares in influence. And mostly these hectares are calculated based on the active rewilding site. And then, for example, if we are working on affected peatland that connects to protected peatlands, we can get up to a larger landscape level. Individually, we have about 85 sites from the high Arctic in Utsjoki and Inari border. This is in the Sami area, far up into the Arctic from the European viewpoint, 69 latitude, then down to southern boreal in western Finland in a province called Pirkanmaa. Some of our sites are on the same level as Finnish national parks. I'll talk about that scale question in a second. But as said, we are combining indigenous knowledge and science, try to prioritize some of the basins that are doing poorly. And very importantly for the audience that's not very interested in Finland, but might be interested in how to realize rewilding that matters, is the last point, jobs. In our case, it's not only jobs for the rural areas, it's also self-esteem. So many of the women, many of the people that would be in the villages are, of course, part of an out-migration pattern, like just across Europe. And one of the exciting things we have tried to do over the past 5 years is mechanisms. How do you have safe equity jobs for the ladies? How do they stay on? How do the men have a job? And what are the mechanisms to engage with the youth and the elders or old people? I can answer in the Q&A, but I'll just mention that we launched earlier this year the very first River Guardians program in Finland that has been tremendously empowering. I don't use that word very lightly, but it's been a mechanism through which the village people and others have been able to share in Koitajoki a wealth of new information on what to do regarding restoration and rewilding. This is one of the largest sites in our program regarding scale that we own physically, and it's also one of the Rewilding Europe's network of sites. It's called Kivisuo. It's in the subarctic, quite close to the Arctic Circle, a little bit south of that in a place called Muhos. In biological terms, it's one of the southernmost important places for peregrine falcon, these highly endangered hawks and falcons. And as you can see from the aerial photo, it's massive. It's kilometers and kilometers wide. And then it's also strategically purchased and rewilded for the purposes that it's part of this 20-kilometer wide peatland complex. And it was smack in the middle. So by purchasing and working and ultimately conserving this site that became the largest protected area in Finland in 2020, we were able to save or create a connectivity over 20 kilometers by 10 kilometers peatland system that contains probably more carbon and will be now safely locked away than let's say the city of Muhos in the nearby area produces every year. Well, let's look at a quick round of toolbox. What's on the table? How does it actually look like? What are the things going on? Of course, Finland used to have a large number of grayling, trout, and whitefish populations that are migratory fish. Just like in Sweden, a large number of hydrostations and alteration of the landscapes has led to the extinction of many of the trout, salmo, trutta populations. And that's why on the lower left-hand corner, you can see Teemu and Lauri restoring gravel sites for spawning for some of these salmonid fish, including grayling and trout. And this is a small stream called Avokampuro in North Karelia. In the middle, you can see one of our smallest tools. I'll go next to the scale of rewilding and what are then in the toolbox for the actual solutions on land. But I just show you 1 hectare wetland that has been restored to a peatland that's producing teal and goldeneye families, like you can see in the middle. So this kind of message that this photo would be implying is that even small spaces can be effective for biodiversity if they are well placed and they actually work. So by creating wetlands or water protection measures, there's often an added teal or goldeneye family that will be enjoying that place for their nesting. The final photos on the right are then some of the heavy-duty work. Who wants to work with diggers? Who wants to be guiding tractors and caterpillars over dozens of hectares? Not me. But unfortunately, some of the sites are so big and so affected that we have to use heavy machinery, and that's how it looks like. So we often try to make these decisions so that it's the village operator and the local businesses that are able to produce if they have the right kind of diggers, for example, the width of the tractor blade or these chains or other equipment needs and the skill to support peatland restoration. But it has been a great success to be able to channel large portions of our funding to the actual villages and let them do the work and so on and so on. Finally, a sneak peek into the work of our work in the Sami forests. This is a view from the high Arctic where the tree line ends. So you can see that most of the trees are Scots pine. And this is a site where there was clear cuts in 1990s. And one of the measures that we are working to rewild these actual habitats is very hard. The forest cycle for a comeback of an old growth forest can be 200 to 300 years. I won't be around to see it, which is of course a pleasure to everybody, but the the methods by which we are trying to work are, for example, the increase and testing of the use of decaying timber, which is kind of the engine for the boreal forest, as you can see in this photo. Okay, so I have about 8 minutes and a couple of slides on scale, and then we can open up the Q&A. And please, Julia, wave or let me know if I'm being naughty, and we'll go over the time frame.
It's all good.
But I want to talk about today a little bit on scale. How do we actually create and enable rewilding landscapes, and what does it entail in Finland? Let's start from the small. This is our smallest in the toolkit or box, wetlands that are working as a water protection units, local hotspots for biodiversity. I already mentioned the teal and the goldeneye, and they are of course also landscape elements. And we can say here that they are usually between 1 and 5 hectares. The level of what I would call perhaps the smallest single site level is around 30 to 50 hectares. We have calculated based on the literature, our field observations and knowledge, scientific knowledge, that it's usually for peatlands between 30 to 100 hectares that matters, and you have to secure somehow in terms of the land use to be recovering, to work to support, for example, the nesting populations of European golden plover or the other food chains and ecosystem functionality. For boreal forests, we are guided by previous work, for example, by Ilkka Hanski and some of the other Finnish people who actually know about boreal, Timo Kuuluvainen, who know about the structure and functionality of recovering boreal forests. And there we can usually find below Arctic Circle about 15 to 25 hectare sites that are the minimum for avoiding extinctions. Well, moving on from the largest or the single site approach around that 30 to 100 hectare level, then to our biggest tools, which are the whole basin or catchment area wide rewilding. And this is an example of a lake system. You can see it there on the right hand corner. It's also one of the Rewilding Europe's network sites called Kuivasjärvi. It's a 16,000 hectare lake catchment where we have enabled land purchases and land concessions on the critically important sites. And there's a local association that then facilitates some of the community engagement. Don't have time to go to details, but please ask and we can come back to this on the Q&A. But this hopefully gives you some scale idea that as a part of these catchment rewilding programs, we have to deploy those small 1 to 5 hectare wetlands and other recovering dozens per system. So there, for example, here we have on and on and on wetlands after another that are on the recovery. But the next scale is to try to work with landowners, or if nothing else works, try to buy sites which are working between the 30 and 100 hectare level. And then ultimately, if you really want to move a lake or river into a better space, then you have to start to look into the catchments and what can be done to restore functionality, stepping stones, recovering sites, and ecological corridors, and so on and so on. People are interested nowadays about peat mining. I'll just say that this is the largest wetland in Western Finland, one of our sites for support for the willow ptarmigan. As you can see, it's another 36 hectare site, and based on the monitoring we can see here, it's helping the southernmost populations of this northern bird. Many people come to us to say, how are you doing with carbon? What are the climate benefits? This can be summarized in our rigorous monitoring program using trace gas analyzers into 3 points. Rewilding alleviates soil-based emissions if well done on peatlands immediately. It may start natural causings, but it really depends on what you are doing and what's the land use. And finally, it does keep carbon on the ground. You know that in the Boreal and the Arctic, about 1/3 of world soil-based carbon remains, and that's why these are extremely important sites for the climate file. Just to make the note that we are not participating in the carbon credits world or sell or trade any financial benefits from our sites. Maybe I'll skip these 2 parts. What are the priorities for the next few years with Rewilding Europe and separately as an independent cooperative and a program? We have been awarded a large grant from Sweden to work with the assessment and advancement of rewilding in the Sami areas. So over the next 2 years, we are concentrating on Boreal, North Boreal, old growth forest systems that are critically important, but being currently clear-cut by the state forestry company, both in Finland and Sweden, Sveaskog and Metsätalous in Finland. That's why we are on an extinction line. So the Sami as indigenous peoples don't have any land rights. And that's why some of the mechanisms that we have in the Landscape Rewilding Programme are enabling those indigenous rights in practice. And that's why we have a large body of Sami staff that guide and decide on those sites. It's not our job to decide on Sami lands, but we are using some of the portion of the program to alleviate and essentially save the critically important boreal forest habitats. The second large program over the next 2 years, and I know Julia is concerned about the time, I'm almost at the end, so this is the last slide. We have a second very large program that's underway with the support from the Endangered Landscapes Programme in the UK. Rewilding Europe has also been the recipient of many support mechanisms from this very large Cambridge-based foundation, and we are focusing on Koitajoki. Koitajoki is also another network site. It's about, for the people who love numbers, it's the home of 6,500 square kilometers of peatlands, one of the most wild parts of Europe, and greatly affected. Hydro stations, clear cuts, and lots of peatland loss. And on top of that, big problem with mercury. So we are working over the next 2 years, spending 1.5 million euros to restore 1,000 hectares of primary peatlands and help also the fish, the forests, and the people. I should note for the cultural people in the audience that this is the home of the Finnish Kalevala, the national epic. So Koitajoki gave the world the songs that J.R.R. Tolkien, for example, utilized in the Lord of the Rings saga. Finally, we are supporting the recovery and mechanisms to enable wild forest reindeer. A lot of our sites already that we own or work at are calving areas. I almost said spawning areas, but this is a mammal, so calving areas of this iconic Rangifer tarandus fennicus. So in some ways, there's no more Finnish species than this that you can see on the photos. It's the wild reindeer. We have, since the Ice Age, been in relationship with this animal, and it's a great priority for the program. I will end by saying that the Snowchange, while we are hillbillies from this northern land far away, we are then, of course, having international partnerships. And specifically on rewilding, we have a large program with indigenous Australians with an organization called Fire Sticks that's using indigenous knowledge to bring fire back into the country. People may recall the devastating fires of 2019 in New South Wales and Queensland, the notion of combining indigenous knowledge and science is at the heart of Firesticks, and we have been working with them for about 15 years. And lastly, a large support mechanism that we have is, of course, send money to Nigeria, which is attempt to support an exchange with Ekuri Forest. It's a 33,000 hectare largest western rainforest in Africa that's implementing the community conserved area model. We don't have an Africa program. We don't want to be another NGO stuck in Africa and doing nothing. This is based on exchanges with the actual Ekuri people and my own village that really want to get something done to preserve the last rainforests in that part of Africa, and that's why we are partnering with them. So that was a whirlwind tour of landscape rewilding in Finland, and I'll stop sharing now and happy to take any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tero. That was great. It was great to hear so much about the amazing work that you're doing. And so it's especially really interesting to see how Snowchange brings together very different components into one thing. So you have the more environmental restoration, then the species restoration, bringing space for those species to thrive, then the carbon aspect, and also the indigenous knowledge and trying to help their interests. So I love to see how well-rounded the work that you do is. So we have a few questions. Please, everyone, feel free to write your questions in the Q&A. We have a couple related to indigenous knowledge, and I actually wanted to start with a question that I had myself surrounding this, which is, how did the collaboration and the work with the indigenous people start? Because I'm sure that that can be a bit tricky, and some people in the public could learn from that.
Yeah, this is of course a very timely question in a world of Black Lives Matter and global discussions on how do you bring indigenous peoples into the work of conservation. How does success look like? Or the other way, if you are an indigenous community, what is a meaningful engagement so that you are not bombarded with ideas and the same over and over again. Our organization is probably the first one around the Arctic. So what I didn't have time for, let me say it here. We have over 25 years of work with Alaska, Canada, Greenland, Sami communities, and we used to have a large Russia program before the war with the indigenous Russian communities that are sometimes part of the Finno-Ugric or our language group. So there was a lot of goodwill and collaboration on climate change work that was well preceding the rewilding and ecosystem restoration priorities over 15 years. That's how we started to work with them. And I'm a Finn myself, I'm not a Sami, but I also in my childhood had a chance to visit and fish with many Sami people in early 1980s, and worked with reindeer herders in 1996 in Utsjoki in Ulmankijärvi area on some of the very early scientific work I did on climate and salmon. So I guess we are taking it as simple as we can. We never expand because Snowchange wants to expand. So we work by invitation. A lot of the indigenous communities that are part of the movement and the organization have asked us to support them on a specific question or more broad engagement. For example, the Sami Council, who is the pan-Sami organization between Sweden, Norway, and Finland, wanted us to support their documentation of Sami knowledge regarding land use and climate change very early on from 2001. And building on those really human relationships, the Sami then inform us what are the things that they would like to see in the ecosystem and rewilding work. And of course, at the center of everything today, and I'll just end with that, is the notion of free, prior, and informed consent. So indigenous peoples are tremendously important guardians of their lands and waters. They have come through the genocide of colonization and many other horrible events, as we are finding out in Canada with the babies who died at the residential schools and many other things. They should be in charge of deciding, or if we are proposing new things for them, they are then, of course, having to consent and inform their own opinion, and they will tell us, or somebody else who is engaging, what is the good way forward. And lastly, I can see in the chat another question on how do you work with traditional knowledge or indigenous knowledge? And I can maybe summarize that by saying that you can only work with indigenous knowledge by the knowledge holders. So don't assume anything. What I have found personally, and some of our other staff, whether it's our fishers in the Finnish context or Sami, reindeer herders and others, is that this is a living knowledge. Let me stop there for a second. This is a living way of knowing. While there is a world of books, articles, films, songs, everything out there, this is a living system of knowledge. And if you don't understand that, there's no point to go and start to have a partnership. And that's why it's very important to understand that you should be prepared for a long engagement, a lot of respect, be very humble, and always follow the lead of the people.
Yeah, well, that was an amazing answer, Tero, honestly. Actually, well, another question by Marta that's related to that. So I think you kind of already answered because you brought up the Native American situation. So she is saying, could this, and by this she means, you know, this exchange between Snowchange and Native American initiatives around the traditional knowledge, could this be brought to Europe on a larger scale? Should Rewilding bring this discussion to the table in Europe?
Yeah, I just came off from Milan, of all places, in Italy, where there was an Arctic summit. So some of the members of the Snowchange wider indigenous group from the Gwich'in in Northwest Territories, Canada, Tahltan people in British Columbia, and some of the Unalakleet people in Alaska came together with the Sami and our teams to discuss exactly what is this, what's often known as the exportability question. So the Arctic is wide, and the boreal, as you know, Alaska, Canada, Russia is even bigger, but it's out of the picture for the war, and rightly so, of course, the horrible turn of events, and then the European North. And the question is that, are there mechanisms that, as Martha is putting forward, how Native American or other Northern indigenous groups can find common spaces or initiatives on traditional knowledge, and how does it work in Europe? Well, I'll be very short on a very complex question. There are some elements of exportability that work from especially Canada, given the same kind of ecosystems, the caribou / reindeer, peatlands, boreal forests, Arctic tundra, so on. One of the primary reasons why things don't work is that in Canada and Alaska, and we can look at this critically, but let's, for the argument's sake, just mention them, there are land rights. There are formal final agreements between the state or the federal system and the indigenous groups, for example, with the Inuvialuit final agreement or Nunavut or some of the First Nations agreements on co-management, co-governance of resources, wildlife, and legal guarantees that the indigenous peoples are the custodians of their lands. In fact, the modern land claim movement around the world builds on these Canadian arrangements in many forms. We don't have that in the European North at all. The only country that has some form of Sami rights is Norway. They have ratified ILO 169, which is the UN document to support some of the rights regarding land, but Finland and Sweden, especially given the logging interest, have not done that. Therefore, the practices of how we combine or how do we export and look at the Canadian and Alaskan conversations in the Sami program and Finnish villages has elements like, for example, the River Guardian program I mentioned, or work with oral histories. So a lot of the Arctic is still not really known, and the people and the villages are the only place where we can learn about long-term ecosystem change. Another compatibility element is the place names. Sami place names carry a wealth of ecosystem data if you can respectfully work with that. And at the same time, great gaps and problems remain. And the priority problem is the land rights. So nothing guarantees respect for Sami rights. Nothing guarantees protection of their forests or lands. And that's why, lastly, there is also the notion of unknown elements of Sami and Finnish knowledge, which is of course not indigenous knowledge, but boreal rural areas that have not been defined. The Sami have probably completely their own context for reindeer nomadic lifestyles that used to be there, Atlantic salmon, and so on, based on the sea historic life. So I'll stop there. I just mentioned that, of course, we have for decades been exchanging and thinking about best practices, but great gaps will remain. And for example, even the basic protection of that knowledge that exists in the US and Canada doesn't exist here.
Yeah, no, that is a great point, and I guess it's a big issue, especially when it comes to the land rights, and something that's more on the governmental and policy side of things that I guess we hope things will be better. Another question related to this is by Gabrielle, and she says, thank you. At some point, it sounds like the rewilding you do is about restoring the natural national Sami heart. What is the general public's opinion on rewilding there?
Yeah, so Gabrielle is referring to Suomi, which is the domestic word for Finns. And
okay, interesting.
Yeah, so there you can see the connection between the Sami and Suomi. That's how our languages are related. So the notion of Finland has been given by the Scandinavians to this barren land where strange people are living and hunting moose. But jokes aside, this is of course a very important question, and timber is at the heart of this conflict. Forests. Peatlands are, when I was young, we couldn't do the things we do now. Any land use by the villages or restoration like this would be a no, let's not go there. But nowadays, peatlands, wetlands, rivers, and waters are more easy to advance and enable mechanisms that are meaningful to villages and landowners, and as you saw, many of our wetland sites or peatlands and so on and so on. The contested space remains forests because there are so many interests. We don't have oil like Norway, so it has been the timber forests in Finland that gave the rise to the national wealth since 1945 and the rapid industrialization of Finland. You may recall in one of the slides how it jumps from 1850 to the present. In a century, everything's gone that used to be there, and regarding forests. So, of course, Finns like to, I'll be very concise, but we can take this the other way, that the Finns, our people are self-identifying as forest people. So if you ever meet a Finn, we can be silent on several languages, as you know, but after a couple of beers, it's all very easygoing, and you can start to hear about the sauna, the summer cabin, somebody love. But the problem is that we have decided to utilize that very thing that defined us for economic purposes. And that's why when Gabriel talks about the heart of our natural heart of our people or the landscape, in some ways this observation is correct, but this is the hardest fight. How do we advance and bring the forests back? And I'll be very unpopular by ending by saying, or answering this by saying, that even in the future, Finland will continue to use the forests. So there will be landscapes like ours where rewilding has supported and a comeback of ecosystem functions, but Finland will continue to use the forests. So therefore, the question is, how are we using those for timber markets? What's the value of the cubic meter? And what can we do in scale, for example, to stop clear cuts, move to a continuous cover forestry, and preserve the age or varied age and species of a boreal forest, even if it's being harvested for some use. And those are some of the, shall we say, on a bad day, the ulcer, that's what I faced when we have to discuss and find solutions to boreal forest questions.
Well, actually, another question that to me kind of connects to this is, so where, because as we were saying, there's the production side of things and then maybe the more conservation side of things. And there was a question early on, which was, how do you manage to get funding at the beginning of your initiative?
Well, let's blame it on Rewilding Europe and the EIB. So you saw from Julia's presentation that there's an element nowadays known as rewilding capital or something along nature capital or something like that. We were bought in 2017 and 18. We were together with an organization from Portugal. We were in the vanguard of getting 2 loans through EIB, European Investment Bank, and then Rewilding Europe to start this program. Those loans have been paid back a long time ago. And then there was a critically important person who is today in the audience, Timon, who worked with us on another arrangement where we could upscale in 2019. And we also were able to deal with those things. And now we are mostly operating on donor funding. I want to be very clear that we are very specific of what kind of funding we accept. So we have been approached by an oil company that offered us $100 million to compensate for the climate impacts, which of course we turned down. First of all, it would have killed the organization, but first and foremost, it would have been and was in great violation of our ethics and morals as a community-based network and in support of the Sami people, for example. So the money is always a question. It's very tricky, and there's a great observance that you have to keep in mind when you upscale. Grants are our solution, so we have worked with, and especially post-prize, there are many entities that have wanted to approach us from the donor world and say, great work on the peatlands, here's a bunch of money, what can we do together? And then we check. So we check every time a conversation happens, and the most complex conversation, where I also want to make it perhaps in public, we have differed on some of the principles with Rewilding Europe. It's healthy to have rigorous debates, is the question of carbon credits. Without going into specifics, we do feel that if these landscapes are recovering, for example, in Finland, certainly they are massively influential in the fight against climate change. But they are now on the recovery. And in our northern rewilding ideas that may be funny or Yahoo to some people, but we do still have them, we think of them almost like people. So we think that there are non-human things out there in the landscape, and peatland may have a kind of a being or entity that's now recovering. That's part of the traditional culture, both for the Sami and in the Finnish older society. And they have the right to decide how they recover, what comes forwards, if they recover. And we have, in a way, the moral imperative in Snowchange to be the guardians of that recovery as they choose to come back or recover. And we have not found a good way to monetize that, and we don't want to monetize that. So it's a cultural decision, and in that sense, we may be an old-fashioned conservation organization from 1970s that we just let nature be as she decides to be. And there's also some problems with the certification and reliability of those things. I won't go into that. But it's important to note that there are values and ethics also in the rewilding network. And in our case, we are in the traditional villages. We have these own thoughts about nature that in some ways are compatible with the European Convention, and on some points they are not. They are distinct principled positions that we hold dear, but they don't have to be, and it's okay. It's called cultural diversity, but we don't often talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's super important to keep an open mind and also respect everyone's perspective, and especially as a network of practitioners all across Europe. I think that's a very important part of what we do. So I super agree. Thank you for mentioning that, Tero. And last point, and this came up in 2 questions. So they want to know more about your background and how you ended in the place that you are now, and what advice you would give to people that are young conservationists of sorts.
Yeah, I guess our staff is asking the same question in great pain. How the hell did he end up in that position? But let's put jokes aside. So I have a terrible sense of humor, so I won't do any more of that. But the point that I can talk about to Nadia and Bettina is that this is the most important question. How did I start? I grew up in a fishing family next to a boreal lake. So in 1976, this is the age of dinosaurs. There wasn't even a fax. What's a fax? Let's not go there. But in any case, I was immersed very early on in a family that was gill netting, fish trapping, and long lining on a boreal lake. And I was also having a flat in the city because we were very poor, but we sold some of our catches, and I grew up in a world of the remnants of our world. So at the very start of my life on this planet, I saw the intact peatlands of 1970s, the intact old growth forests. That's where I grew up. And then I saw it all destroyed in the span of 20 years, for example, on Lake Kuivasjärvi. That's one of the sites in the network. I have always detested the notion of being environmental activist. I'm not an activist. I'm a fisherman. That's my other job. But I want to make sure our waters are healthy. And I saw what happened when the state took those peatlands and destroyed them. And my only very simple dumb question is, what can I do if I have an organization or a similar staff or people that are committed to a long-term, long-haul recovery of this brilliant place? So for Bettina and Nadia, I would say, go out and immerse yourself. None of you are wrong. If you are urban or don't have roots, doesn't matter. Go to a place, find out, and stay there. Extended periods out there in a camp, in a tent, hiking, skiing, diving, fishing, if that would be the best, of course. But in any case, these will give you the one single most thing that our staff is required to have, which is an actual immersion in a natural system. And that's something you will never get from a TikTok, science, or education. So be in nature for the nature to be able to show what's it all about.
Thank you. I think that is a great way to finish this webinar. Make sure that you are truly understand nature and not superficially. Thank you so much, Tero. This was an amazing webinar. I think we all learned a lot. And so if you have any other questions, I will leave you the link of the Snowchange webpage for everyone to access. if they want to. And yeah, I don't know if you have any last things you want to say.
Well, please take care of your own nature. You are, of course, welcome to Finland, see our program. I know that there are some Finns in the audience and probably Swedish colleagues. Please connect. We are here at landscaperewilding.org or snowchange.org. And I thank Julia and also Rewilding Europe for this amazing day and possibility to share with you some of the work we do. So thank you. Kiitos.
Thank you so much, Tero. And if anyone wants to get in contact with Tero, and you can also do it through me. I'm not sharing your email, so I will just, you can, if any members want to contact Tero, please let me know. And yes, thank you so much for today. Thank you to everyone that attended for being here. And I hope you learned as much as I did. And thank you again, Tero. It was so nice to have you here. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.